For those of you who are not familiar with ClientSuccess, or you're just getting familiar with ClientSuccess, we are a customer success management platform and more. Historically, we have been a solo platform, really helping customers, what we said, manage from new to renew, so that entire post-initial sales life cycle. But we are so much more than that. Over the past several months, if you've been following our journey, we've had a series of acquisitions, including one of my personal favorites, Baton. If you're not familiar with Baton, it is an onboarding solution, but so much more. I do encourage you, if you are somebody who leads onboarding, whether it's in your customer success function, you're part of an implementation team, take a peek at it. You will not be disappointed. We have been moving folks over to our solution for the past several months now, and the feedback is fantastic. So if you're interested in learning more about Baton, you can go ahead and scan that QR code. It will bring you to some more information and get a demo scheduled. So if you are interested, I definitely recommend you go check it out. Now, what you're all here for. Now, I mentioned we did have Rob a couple weeks back join us as he kind of kicked off the fundamentals of customer expansion. And I got to tell you, the feedback was so tremendous that I, as an orchestrator of content here at ClientSuccess, would be so remiss if I didn't invite our dear friend Rob back for a two-part series. So this is part one in a two-part. So we've got him today, which is May 20th, and Rob will be joining us back again next Tuesday, same time, same place, on the 27th. So I just felt like there was so much practical and tactical information that we'd all want to learn a little bit more. So Rob, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us today.
What's up, everybody? And thank you, Chrissy, for the kind intro and the welcome back. I don't usually get invited back places, so this is a first one for me. But really, though, it's a big pleasure of mine. There's no greater catharsis for me than just being able to take my failures and my mishaps in the past and turn them into my learnings that I can then share with you. So hopefully, you guys don't make the same mistakes in the future. So for those of you who I don't know, my name is Rob Zambito. I'm a 3-time customer success leader. I'm a full-time consultant. I'm co-host of the Daily Stand-Up podcast, and I'm here to talk to you for the second part of the third series on a topic that's somehow become now near and dear to my heart, although past versions of myself would have cringed to hear myself say that, and that might be you today, which is all around customer expansion, upsell, cross-sell, and other forms of expansion. And so color me surprised when, 10 years ago, I was the most reluctant salesperson I knew, and somehow years later ended up building a customer success team that, many thanks to the people that we brought onto the team, customer success made up 2/3 of net new revenue and brought our company to unicorn status, which was the last, if you were a betting person, you wouldn't have taken that bet, but somehow it worked out. So last time I walked through a real 30-60-90 plan that you guys can use when it comes to implementing an overarching month-by-month structure to create a program like this. And what I found last time is that people seem to really like the tactical advice. So that's our focus for today, is some really specific tactical advice that you can use today with your teams, with your companies, that can help you with your expansion motions. And a lot of these tips, they don't just apply to expansion. They apply to renewals. They apply to customer onboarding. They apply to conversations with your angry mother. Not that anyone like me has ever been there before. And there's also a healthy degree of movie references. So, a lot of you guys know this movie reference, the Derek Zoolander School for Kids Who Can't Read Good. And so this is, for me, the Bobby Z School for Kids Who Can't Sell Good and who want to learn to do other stuff good too. So as a quick refresher, we had 4 quick questions last time. I said, ask yourself if you identify as a salesperson. And because most of the audience here, not everybody, but most of the audience is customer success people, the answers were almost across the board, no. And then I asked, who here wants and needs to refine your sales skills? The answers were almost ubiquitously yes. And you start to see the tension. And the tension really gets underscored when I said, who here has seen this hashtag, open to work? Because there's an immense pressure for customer success to own a revenue number in a meaningful way. And this is a big chunk of that, what we're covering today. And then the last thing I said was, who here has felt uncomfortable selling? So there's a great tension between the status quo and where we want to be as customer success practitioners, or as post-sale practitioners, as account managers, as even salespeople who are responsible for expansion post-deal closure. So if you're here, you're not alone. You're in a good community, a group therapy session right here. But I do want you to ask yourself why. Why are you hesitant? Is it a lack of skill? Is it a lack of bandwidth? Is it a lack of interest? Or maybe a lack of opportunity? So take a quick second to think about why you might have felt uncomfortable selling. And we're going to unpack that and break through it today. So quick background on me. As I mentioned last time, you might remember this slide. Besides being a reluctant salesperson, 10 years in customer success, I built and scaled 3 customer success teams, one of which became a unicorn where customer success made up 2/3 of net new revenue. But now at this point, as a consultant, I've worked with 26 companies, have a playbook a library of 90 templates that I'm happy to share with anybody who's interested. One podcast, the Daily Stand-Up Podcast with 250 episodes. We post an episode every single weekday. If you'd like your podcast debut, this is a great opportunity to get your name out there. We want to be like the voice of the everyday practitioner. So all we do is we ask people what's on your mind in customer success, and super fast and easy, in and out the door in 10 to 15 minutes. And the other things that people seem to find interesting about this slide last time is I said by the numbers. I've inadvertently designed 3 tattoos. I've cut 22 people's hair because I'm an aspiring barber. I would probably do it if I retired. And now, officially, I've been to 100 Planet Fitness locations. Story on that another time. But I think I'm Planet Fitness's most loyal member. They don't seem to care. They haven't responded. So if you want to drop them a quick note, a quick and say, hey, recognize your boy here, I'm open to it. But anyway, that's enough about me. Why are you here? You're here probably because most of you are in customer success and you have built some notion of what success looks like to you at your organizations. A lot of CS orgs, they're deeply lacking a charter. And the charter has shifted significantly over the last several years from a lot of that customer health metrics that we see in the top left around time to value, usage, NPS, into the more big blue, darker blue buckets here around retention, upsell, cross-sell, and customer advocacy. Now, I've always grown up in a school of thought where these are the 3 legs of the stool to make customer success a revenue function. But a lot of customer success teams are having a hard time moving from here into these different domains. And we'll focus on the top right today with some practical tips you can use today with your teams. So the brief anatomy of expansion is quite complicated. Customer-led growth itself is quite complicated, but expansion breaks down, if you're not familiar, into cross-sell, into upsell. Even upsell breaks down into different forms of upsell, whether it's like additional seats or higher tiers in usage. But no matter the model you have, the key takeaway is you need process over hope and chance. We talked about last time why expansion is important, right? If you weren't here, customers who buy more stick around longer. Expansion allows you to churn more customers, especially your non-ICP customers. No one's complaining about that. Expansion puts more money in your pocket. How you doing? Expansion helps justify hiring a large, well-staffed team and maintaining your team, all of which is great. So all sounds well and good, right? But not everyone's going to like this slide because there's good news and there's bad news. I have a hypothesis that you can challenge yourself with today. That you don't have a selling problem. You came here maybe saying you have a selling problem, but you may not have a selling problem. You have a value problem. And that if you fix the value story, the selling part becomes natural. And the value problem isn't the whole thing either. You may also have a process problem. So if you feel called out, I'm sorry, but it's not your fault. So I'm going to introduce you to something called the value model of expansion selling. The reason I say it's not your fault, by the way, a lot of companies are chronically underinvested in this type of motion. A lot of us have seen our sales teams get massive sales enablement, sales tooling, time blocks on their calendar or quota relief periods and whatever, where they can get their sales teams ramped. Most of us in customer success have not had that. So prioritizing process over hope basically means, you guys might remember this meme from last time. It's not as simple as, my boss congratulating me on an upsell and me just saying sure when customers ask for more licenses. The key thing here is to know that hope, chance, and sporadic wins are not enough. A playbook is your unlock. So that implies clear deal stages, time agendas, time constraints, exit criteria per stage. And without that, you might just be seen as like a hobbyist who had some wins here and there, but you're not a career expansion person. And by the way, a lot of people are complaining like, oh, I'm not being seen as strategic. Well, here's a number of ways that you can break through that today without being seen as just, the Jeremy Lin of customer success. We talked about Glengarry Glen Ross last time, the always be closing. We're not doing that today. Instead, we're going to go through the value model of expansion, which is something that I created recently to basically apply labels to the different deal stages. And we're going to go through each deal stage with practical steps at each stage. Validation, that's your prospecting process. Assessment, that's your discovery process. I want to spend most of our time there. Link to solutions, that's your pitch. Uncovering blockers, that's where you get into negotiation, objection rebuttal handling, and then finally execution. So I think assessment, so it's A, assessment, and U, uncovering blockers, where I want to spend most of our time. And I want you guys to play the role of my manager. I'm going to talk about real things that I've done in the past that didn't serve me super well, and you're going to critique me. You're going to tell me what I should be doing differently based on what I show you that I did, the before and after. So, cool. So starting with the validation phase, that was stage one, right? The value validation. This is your prospecting stage. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but I will just say, if you skip this, it might make all the difference. Most of us in this room don't spend any time prospecting, not nearly enough at least. So my before state, again, light me up in the Q&A in the chat. Tell me why this is wrong. I used to make so many excuses. I'm too busy. I've got this churning customer. I've got this customer blocked in onboarding. I need a referral from this other customer. I wasted time on poor fit deals. I waited for inbounds to save the day. I had weak outreach. I said check-ins, which make me cringe now. I gave up after one try. I targeted the wrong personas, not Vito, which those who were here last time, Vito is a very important top officer. And this might be you. You might be laughing at me, but like, hey, turn the mirror on yourself. This might be you. If you search your inbox right now for the words check-in, I bet you might be surprised with how often you're saying that. And check your calendars. Do you have a recurring outbound block? Most of us don't. But even customer success managers who don't own expansion, I almost always recommend you set an outbound block for that period of time where you can be quote unquote strategic, which is a word I have a lot of tension with how it's used in the industry today. So instead, my outbound looked a little bit like this. It was really pathetic. And what I found was that, again, we're going to break this down as a team here. You're going to help me out. You're going to help out young Rob. If we break down all the different things, the befores and afters, when I said just checking in, I learned to open instead with a personalized trigger. So how does that sound? It sounds a little bit more like, hey, just instead of saying just checking in, I would say, hey, I saw you just hired this role, got this funding, launched this new product. Would you be opposed to exploring how others handle that? Now, why this works is that it provides relevant outreach to grab attention. There's a whole body of psychological research that I have layered behind basically every one of these tips that I'm not going to bore you with today. That's what I'm a geek for. The interesting thing that you'll notice here is I said, would you be opposed to exploring how others handle that? And some folks who in the room who are in sales might say, I recognize that strategy. Because what I'm doing there is I'm using no-based questions. Some people here have probably read Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. I'm a big fan of Chris Voss. That book, one of the strategies that he uses is to say, use no-based questions, where saying no actually allows you to break through the scripting and the psychology and the sort of calcified minds that we have that make us resist moving forward. And so this isn't manipulative, but I did learn to say, instead of saying, do you have time for a call? If you say, would you be opposed to a quick 10-minute call? It was way more effective because it got us out of the minds of being sort of just scripted and saying no. And if you're working with naysayers out there and they say no, that means proceed. So I also say like, do you mind if we take 10 minutes for a call? It's also more polite, right? And it keeps control of the conversation. I used to not leave voicemails, and then I learned to leave curiosity-driven voicemails. I don't know why I was so scared of a voicemail. That would sound like, hey, it's Rob. They might not even know who I am, by the way. Hey, it's Rob. I've got an idea that might be worth your time. I'll send a note your way as well. Primes and for your follow-up. And by the way, if you notice, there's two layers to that. I said I followed up with an email. What I learned to do was when I used to give up after one attempt, I learned to create 5 to 7 touch sequences with those designated call blocks I was talking about. That might look like, touch one is a call and email, touch two is a LinkedIn message, touch three is a voicemail. And a lot of you are probably saying, well, shouldn't I already have a relationship with this person if they're my customer? Yes, you should, but you might not. I mean, I talked with 2 teams yesterday who said, I don't know, the owner bought the software and disappeared. I've never met the owner, and now I have to go win the renewal. So whether it's a renewal or an expansion, it's the same principles that apply. By the way, if you're interested in geeking out about that psych research, there's something called the mere exposure effect that I could talk to you about here that basically says one touch is not enough. There used to be so many CSMs that I worked with where they would say, I really can't get a hold of them. And I would say, have you tried calling? And they're like, oh, no, I didn't actually. I'm like, okay, well, maybe let's do that then. And there's an actual talk track that I used in the past, which I think some of you guys might find helpful, which, when I was doing outreach and I'm feeling very uncomfortable, I learned to say, look, I'm not on the sales team. I am on the customer success team. So my job here is to make sure you're successful with all aspects of the product across all lines of your business. Do you mind if I tell you why I reached out to you specifically today? And I would say, if all I get is your feedback, that's a win for both of us. However, I'm going to be honest with you. I would really like to find a way to work on this together, and I will try to sell you on it. And just being so authentic and honest about that with the customer made me feel like, oh, well, this isn't so bad. I don't have to put on some mask. So the after state, whereas this was the before in the gray, the after state was me prospecting with discipline, not luck, repeatable, scalable, measurable process with clearly established playbooks and dashboards. Man, did that feel better. So my CTAs for you, my calls to action for you, search your inbox for check-in, establish that recurring outbound block, and also just establish your V1 playbook and dashboard if you don't have it already. If you're establishing a V2, that's cool too. Good for you. You're a step ahead. I'm happy to help refine it for anybody out there. So that's the prospecting phase. But where I think most people will really enjoy the conversation here is when we get to A, assessment. And that's your discovery process, where I had to realize maybe I don't have to act like this Glengarry Glen Ross salesperson. Maybe instead I can act more like my doctor, right? Maybe I'm a doctor. Maybe today's the day that I finally make my grandmother proud. No, this is where the value story begins. So the before story there looks like this in red. I would ask weak questions like, how are things going? I am notorious for the second bullet point here. I would spend half a meeting just building rapport. Or I would jump straight into a demo. I didn't see those things as things that worked well together. And so I didn't know how to, find a good middle ground where I could do both, build rapport and eventually get to the demo post-discovery. I took surface level questions at face value. I didn't uncover the real decision process. And again, this might be you. I hope you don't feel called out here, but maybe ask yourself, are your discovery calls under 15 minutes? Are they over 30? Do you even have discovery calls? Are you pitching before you hear the pain? Have you ever left a call without knowing the prospect's buying process? All of these things I'm notoriously guilty for. I'm not blaming you for, but let's modify that. Again, play the role of my manager here. And I want you to chime in on what I should be doing differently here. Instead of how's everything going, how could I rephrase that? Think about that for a second. What I learned to do is to start with a very clear purpose-driven agenda. I want to be respectful of your time, so here's how this usually works. That was such a better, and do that, by the way, within the first 3 minutes. That was such a better way than me building rapport for 10 minutes. The other thing I would do is set up a schedule for the buying process early on, a mutual action plan. I didn't used to do that. I used to think that, and I would get strung along by some prospects, some customers. To be honest with you, look, I'm selling my own consulting services every day. There are some folks I've been talking to for 2 years because I did not set up the right process and the right schedule early on. And now we just have these periodic quote unquote check-ins, and I'm suffering from my lack of process in the past. But what that does is it positions you as a professional and a guide whose time is valuable, and the customer's is as well. and you have a structured process. Clients really like this, by the way. A recent anecdote, you won't believe this. I overheard a friend demoing two tools. He chose what he thought might be the worst tool because they had a better process. He said, I trust their process. So even if the tool has some bumps and bruises, I want to work with them as a company, which was really interesting. I used to always assume my champion was the economic buyer. So I learned to always ask the internal approval process. The thing I would say is the last thing I'd want is for this to get derailed at the 1 yard line and we both look silly. So what's the internal approval process you're going to go through? Do this, by the way, even if you're in renewals, in onboarding, wherever you're at, to start multi-threading. I used to take vague answers, and then I learned to use layered follow-ups. So, I heard somebody say, well, we're looking at this because our pipeline is slow. What I learned to do was really unpack that and say, your pipeline's slow? What does that mean? What does that look like in the numbers? Oh, well, we lost 250K in deals last quarter. Oh, you lost 250K in deals last quarter. So you're telling me this is a $1 million problem. And our, expansion product is only 10K? Okay, that sounds way more reasonable and proactively prevents them from saying it's too expensive early on. The three magic words I've learned here are tell me more. Tell me more. If you're ever not sure what to say, just say tell me more and get the customer talking. Super helpful to uncover deep pain. And then I would learn to I used to jump into the demo as well. I mean, honestly, I skipped a lot of this discovery. So here's my list of top discovery questions. Feel free to screenshot this and try using some of these today. Everything from what brought you to the call today to what would make this a win for you. I really like this next question. What's a bad day look like for you right now? And I like to ask customers to even share their screen with what they're doing day to day, because that gives me a lot of information about how to build value for them. And you could skim through a lot of these. Why hasn't this been solved today? What initiatives are you working on? I like this one. What happens if you do nothing? I'm just curious. You might leave this call today saying we're not going to move forward, and that's totally fine. But what happens then? Do you lose that $1 million of pipeline? What would it mean for you personally if we solved this? And then, as I said, what's the internal approval process? I do always recommend, look, when you're on these calls, again, I don't care if it's an expansion call or a QBR, use a timer, pay attention to your time, and that mutual accountability slide that I mentioned. Some further reading, I wanted to give a shout out to a friend of mine, just saw him last week. Follow him if you don't already. His name is Scott Leese. I learned a lot of this from him. He talks about something called the addiction model of selling, which I'm not going to try to regurgitate here, but basically it suggests that the same model where people go through overcoming addiction is actually a similar model to how people break through in the sales process. I know it sounds a little weird, but basically the customer has to first acknowledge they have a problem in order to then acknowledge it's important enough to solve, in order to then say, this is worth solving now. There's tons of problems out there we have where we don't solve them right now. And only then do you show your product. Product demos, get rid of them. You only use the product demo after you've done these first 3 stages. So, before and after discovery-wise. The after state, I worked on discipline, not luck. I had methodical lines of questioning. I sounded like a wannabe Socrates. Honestly, this is a really bizarre reading recommendation, but read The Republic. It's a really interesting way to think about customer discovery. Socrates was not in customer success, but he would have made a good CSM. Where customers are talking 70% of the time, where I knew their pain, their approval path, their personal stake. And my CTAs for you here, my calls to action are create a set agenda with a question sequence for your discoveries and practice with friends. Practice with your coworkers. I've walked into so many sales rooms where I see 20 reps all practicing with each other for hours at a time. And I've almost never seen that in customer success. So we're halfway through. Link to solution. This is your pitching process, and that's where you connect value to reality. A lot of you guys know this movie reference, the sell me this pen exercise. If you don't, this is like the classic thing that salespeople roll their eyes at, and customer success people say, oh, I actually don't know how do you sell a pen? The canonical example here is that the wrong way to sell a pen is to say, oh, It doesn't bleed in your pocket. It writes upside down. It can write in space. And you're talking about all the features and functionality of a pen, but who cares if the pen can write in space? It doesn't matter. The right questions to be asking if you're moving from this discovery phase to the pitch is to say things like, well, how do you use a pen day to day? How long have you been in the market for a pen? Right? Questions that are buyer centric. So the before state, let's talk about that. And again, please critique me in the Q&A. I want to see all sorts of criticisms. What's wrong with the fact, the before state, where I used to jump into a demo without confirming real pain, where I led with the F words? If you remember what the F words are from last time, features and functionality. I saw somebody chimed in with something similar in the chat. Features and functionality instead of the outcomes. And I would show everything instead of what mattered. I talked the entire time. I walked away without clear next steps or commitments. And this might be you. You might be using a generic demo script. You might be showing features no one asked about. You might be ending demos by saying, let me know what you think. And so let's break this one down too. How do we change this? Instead of jumping into the demo, I would start with a discovery recap. Here's what I heard matters to you. Let's focus on that. I would lead with outcomes and value instead of the F words. So I would say things like, this can help you cut onboarding time by 30%. This can solve your $1 million sales pipeline problem. To focus on the ROI. This is a really key takeaway. I mean, even if you do customer training, like even if you're not in expansion, I used to show everyone everything. And that was just way less effective than when I customized the demo, where I would say, based on what I heard, I'm going to skip to the most relevant parts of our product or solution. I'm not going to waste your time with the other stuff. And it was just mic drop, mic drop, mic drop, mic drop. I used to talk too much, and I learned to use strategic pauses and selective demoing. Tell me how this aligns with what you're working on, right? So bring it back to the workflow for your customer to create engagement. I used to have no clear steps. So I learned to define clear value outcomes and hold firm on those next steps. So if this solves what we've discussed, we'll review a proposal on our next call. I'm going to slide this out 1 week, this meeting, if I don't have a time on the calendar already. I'm going to slide this out 1 week. That's going to be our proposal review call. That's a great way to show control in the call and guide the customer buyer journey. So the after state was way better. I would start every pitch by recapping discovery points. I would lead with outcomes, skip irrelevant content, use mic drops, and always close with the next step. The next phase we're going to cover here is uncovering blockers. Now, when I was in high school, I was a big nerd. I was on the debate team. And I even spent my summers at debate camp. Really good for my college application, not good for my social life. But but I thought I knew how to handle objections. I really thought I knew how to handle objections, and I was humbled when it came time for me to focus on expansion selling. And the interesting thing is I used to take objections as no. And what I learned is that objections are value signals in disguise. They're value signals in disguise. So here's how it actually looked, probably, 8 to 10 years ago. I used to freeze up when I would hear complaints like, it's too expensive. I might even agree with them. It is expensive, and let them go. Little did I know actually agreeing with them was the right first step. I used to take objections personally, and I avoided pushing back, or I pushed back too hard, or I promised discounts before hearing the real objection. That's the worst. I did this as recently as 2 months ago. I'm still overcoming a lot of these old habits. I closed out the call with like, let me know when you've decided, and I didn't book a follow-up. And this might be you. Again, to turn the mirror on you, you might be lacking a structured objection rebuttal document. Most customer success teams I talk to, I'll say, do you have an objection rebuttal document? They'll say, I think our sales team has one. I'm like, that's completely different. You might be sending proposals without a proposal review call. You might be offering a discount before the customer even asks. So let's break this one down. When the customer says, I need to think about it, how do we overcome that? What can you do instead? Get specific. Great. Our best customers think about decisions as impactful as this. What's on your mind? That's a great way to not let the customer off the hook with them just saying, I need to think about it. Why this usually works and it doesn't always work. It didn't work for me 2 weeks ago when I used this. It surfaces real objections. If a customer said it's too expensive, I learned to dig into why and redirect comparison. I'm going to do a couple touch points on this it's too expensive objection just because it's like the most common one that everybody gets. So if I'm digging into why, I would say things like totally valid, curious, expensive compared to what? What did you have in mind? And that's an important question, right? Expensive compared to a competitor, expensive compared to their budget, expensive compared to the $1 million problem that we think we're solving for them, because that doesn't sound too expensive. And so what I learned to really do is suss out, is this a budget issue or a value issue? For those who are on the call, even if you're working renewals with price increases, sometimes you're going to run into this. When people would say, I need to check internally, I learned to uncover the internal approval process, right? Just curious, what do you think your business partner is going to say? What's their biggest concern? And that was we don't have time to go into this today, but there's a whole bunch of research I've done around champion development. And that's where you can start your champion development. When people would say, it's still too expensive, I learned to use mirroring and playbacks. For the Chris Voss fans in the room, if you're ever in a pinch and you don't know what to say, sometimes just repeating back the last words you heard, like, too expensive? Well, yeah, it's just, it's this quarter we've got, a lot of big initiatives and we just made a big investment in a CRM and like, oh, okay, so it's a this quarter problem. If you just ask the simple question with a simple playback, too expensive, that can get the customer to give you all the gushy details. So there's a different model. I learned this from my sales colleagues as feel, felt, found, which is really helpful when working on any objection handling, which basically says you feel where the customer is coming from. You felt this way before. What you found is, I found that to be a little formulaic for me. So I've actually been working on a new version of that, which I'm calling relate, reflect, reveal. So you relate to the customer where they're at. Challenge yourself to agree with the customer when you disagree with them in your heart of hearts. Challenge yourself to agree with them. Be like, yeah, you know what? It is expensive and budgets are tight. And then reflect to normalize their experience. Look, you're not alone. I've seen this movie before. And then pivot to the positive with your reveal. Do you mind if I share what I've found? And by the way, I like using a permission-based transition to prevent yourself from over-talking. Do you mind if I share what I've found? And then I share, what's really interesting is others find that with the solution, they achieved a certain positive result. Key takeaway here, when you get the answer you want, please stop talking. I am notorious for this as well. I keep blabbering. And when push comes to shove, consider using something I've learned from some sales colleagues as the takeaway, which is just to say, hey, maybe you don't need a solution at all, right? Should we just file this away? And sometimes that element of reverse psychology is a refreshing way to be very authentic to the customer, to protect your time, and also to find out, are they actually in the buying state of mind? I actually have an actual example that I pulled from a text with a prospect just recently. Somebody said to me, I'm just focused on overhauling, a former coworker who's now wants me to come on as a consultant. I'm just focused on overhauling someone else's business idea area right now. So I have to not piss off too many people. And so my feel, felt, found, it basically doesn't follow the formula, but it does do the same thing. I get it, limited political capital, seen that movie before, we both have. Hey, maybe that could be ideal timing, I don't know. I tend to see change management usually comes best as a multi-part package as opposed to separate initiatives. So this is an interesting way where I was sort of taking the objection and shedding light on it with a rebuttal. So in the slide deck I'll share just a couple other examples, but basically I just want to wrap up on the one, it's too expensive. That might sound, instead of saying like, I mean, look, it's really valuable, which is what I used to say, things like that, to say, look, totally get it. I've heard that before. It's a big investment for anything with a big impact. Do you mind if I share what I've found? Usually folks see pretty big ROI relative to the cost you've discussed before. I can actually walk you through our ROI calculator, which, by the way, if you don't have an ROI calculator, send me a LinkedIn message. I'll help you build one. So as far as these Chris Voss techniques, I'm not going to go into these as well, but I do want to recommend further reading. He goes through a bunch of strategies that can really help. And at that point, you're at the point where you can wrap the call with some mastery. So look, you're not going to win every one of these objection calls. A lot of times you're going to have objections still outstanding. And so what you can do there at the end of these calls, oh, I used to fanboy over some people that I worked with. They were so good at this. And they'd say, okay, I understand you have these objections. You can't move forward because X, Y, and Z. Is it fair to say that if we check those off, we're good to move forward? I just want to make sure I have my checkboxes outlined. And then put that in the shared document you have with the customer. Like, okay, these are our checkboxes. We check these off, we're good to move forward. You owe that to yourself instead of chasing people down. And again, the same thing might apply if you're working a renewal, even if you're working a customer out of onboarding and the customer is saying, we need these features and we need these bugs fixed. You're like, okay, so just to be clear, our exit criteria, which is a term I recommend using often, our exit criteria from this phase, customer onboarding phase, are X, Y, and Z. We check those off, you're done onboarding, right? Meanwhile, a lot of teams out there, they have these never-ending onboarding processes. So my after state looked more like this. I used relate, reflect, reveal. I used Chris Voss moves. I stayed firm on pricing. I asked directly for the close, and man, did that feel good. I booked the next step on every call. And my CTAs for you are block time this week to draft or update your objection rebuttal document and build a strong proposal review call agenda. And finally, again, role play. Please practice, practice, practice. Because we're getting into now the final stage here. We're going to close out on closing, which is all about execution. You're only done when the DocuSign ink is dry. But I didn't used to know that. And again, this sort of comically bad younger version of me. I remember when I started in a selling function at one company, a super scrappy startup, and the CEO and I were talking about how easy it was going to be to sell this thing. Direct quote, sales is trivially easy. It was not trivially easy. We actually then set up some early morning call blocks, cold call blocks. This is before we had customers, so I couldn't do customer success yet. And we famously quit cold calling. We were like, I guess we're wrong. I guess this is never going to work. We were humbled multiple times in this journey. I used to send proposals and hope for the best. I used to not schedule proposal review calls. And I didn't confirm decision criteria. Again, this might be you. You might not have proposal review calls. You might have left a call without clearly defining next steps. And maybe you're afraid to ask for the close. So I want to take just 5 minutes to wrap up on this. Instead of I'll send the proposal, schedule that review call. Instead of not asking for the close, use permission-based closing. Would you be opposed to moving forward today and booking our kickoff? By the way, that's a good pro tip. Sometimes it makes sense to book the next call before you have the ink on paper, just so that you have a guaranteed time on the calendar. Again, I still do this today. I'm like, just to align calendars, you might choose to not move forward, and that's totally fine. Totally fine. But let's just put something on the calendar. If we're going to do a kickoff, when would that be? Week next steps, I learned to assign clear next steps. Based on this, I recommend X. And by the way, I recommend is one of the phrases that I learned to use all the time. Instead of handling pricing too early, like I used to self-sabotage and just say, well, the list price is this. When I say the list price is this, that means that there's a discount available. And instead of getting into pricing conversations early, I learned to say like, well, let's just first make sure this solves what you need, then we'll cover pricing. I learned to hold firm on pricing, to say either like, you know what, you want the best price, you're looking at it. Or actually the line I really like is, look, our pricing is very simple. And then hit the mute button after you say the pricing, so you don't negotiate against yourself. This is a really difficult skill I had to learn. So some closing strategies, as I said, have the contract ready to go live on the call on the proposal review. So you can just send it and review it together if things are moving along well. And maybe you don't need a contract for this expansion motion, right? Like, for example, I've worked some expansion motions where, you're just expanding to new branches of a bank or new departments within some healthcare institution or something like that. You probably don't need a contract, but you at least need to be ready. Like, that's the key takeaway. Be ready to take those next steps. Think 2 steps ahead. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention, I talked about these other bullets here, but the last thing I just wanted to mention is look, closed loss is not closed lost. Okay? Build a nurture campaign for your closed loss deals. So my after state was way better. I ran a structured proposal review call. I confirmed decision criteria. I used permission-based closing, anchored high, and booked next steps. So again, the value model of selling. V validation, that's your prospecting. We've gotten pretty good at qualification, inbound, outbound. A assessment, discovery. We've talked a lot about questioning, pain, value. This is your value mapping exercise, and it's fundamental to selling with value. L is linking to the solution, and that's your pitch. Don't do that until you've already done your discovery thoroughly well, where you cover recommendations, solutions, and value. U is uncovering blockers. That's your negotiation, objection, rebuttal stage. And then E is execution, which is all about closing, where you go through approvals and contracting and payment, and you ring a gong. Salespeople are not the only people who get to ring gongs. Our resource recommendations here, we've talked about these, several of these. 30 Minutes to President's Club is where I've learned a lot of these. It's a really simple, easy to digest podcast that I really like. And I've mentioned a number of other of these in previous sessions. So speaking of previous sessions, our next session is going to be all about more at the executive level, the 30,000-foot level, playbook development, pipeline reviews, fundamentals of finances and forecasting, RevOps fundamentals, selling during support and onboarding. A lot of people really liked that as part of a revamped customer journey map where expansion is layered into various customer touch points in nuanced and persuasive ways. So I'm a reluctant salesperson. I didn't think I would love this as much as I do, but I really do. And I've seen so many customers thoroughly enjoy the process of going through expansion that frankly didn't used to like the way I did it before. So if you want help with any of this, please let me know. hello@robzambito.com is my email. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Follow me for my 100th Planet Fitness journey that I'm going to be posting about soon. And that's all I've got. Let's hear it for you guys for being here, and let's go through some Q&A.
Excellent. I'm sure everyone like myself was like taking notes and screenshots. So I'm guessing that everyone who was watching was doing the same. And I've already got people who had to drop who were messaging me and emailing about like the recording already. So awesome job, Rob. You delivered exactly what I had hoped, which is practical, tactical advice on how to navigate this. So just thank you so much. Guys, I so many screenshots. Exactly. Like I'm sitting here screenshotting. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, uh-huh. Because even if you know this stuff, it's so great to just reaffirm it and to validate and just, I mean, honestly, there's always good tips in there and friendly reminders to put certain things to practice. All right, excellent, guys. So we have some time for Q&A. Let's not waste that time. We've got him for 11 minutes and let's put him to work. So if you've got questions, let's go. I'm confident that a lot of people took screenshots of every single slide. All right, go ahead and drop your questions into the Q&A. If you remember, I said use the Q&A at the bottom, not the chat. So we've got a couple questions, Rob. Let's go through. First one is from Anonymous. How do you reroute meetings when your partner goes off script or away from the previous set agenda?
Good question. And I'm assuming partner means, your customer or your prospect here. So it all starts up front. I think the key thing I learned is you have to be the one who sets the agenda. And this is where I would make the mistake in the past. I got so tied up in the rapport building that by minute 6, the customer then took over and set the agenda, or the partner took over and set the agenda. And that was really unfortunate because then I was derailed. We were running their process, not mine. Now, if you have to reset, that's totally fine. Ask permission to reset. Again, a lot of what I said is I've learned that I can be authentically myself if I'm just sort of treating it like kind of a friend going off the rails. I mean, we've all been there. We've all got friends who we need to coach through some difficult situations where I'm like, do you mind if we just take a minute just to reset? Nothing wrong with that. In fact, a lot of people show gratitude for it.
All right, I love that advice. Let's go to our next question here. Would love to hear more concrete examples of champion development. So, for example, how we can work with our contacts to tell the story internally.
Yeah, this is a really good question. Really good question. So the first thing I've learned here is, look, I don't want this to sound, I'm just so neurotic that I don't fully trust my champions. And I always feel like I need to guide them through my value story, the value story they're going to tell internally. So I train them early on. First of all, I suss out who are the decision makers behind the scenes, who's the veto behind the scenes that is part of that internal approval process. And I justify that, as I said, by saying, look, the last thing you and I want is for this to get derailed at the 1 yard line. So how about we start getting your CEO involved sooner? And then what I do is I train them on the value story. What a lot of my champions were doing is they'd go internally, they'd make the case at the next board meeting or whatever, and their pitch sounded like, oh, it's just so great, we need to make this investment. And then they'd get humbled in that meeting because that's not a very good case. So what I would do is I would prepare usually a one pager. It's like, here's the ROI, here's the value story, here's why this is worth our time and our investment. Based on everything we've heard, right? What we heard, what we propose, how the ROI is there, and just give that to your champion to share internally. It makes them way more effective. Obviously, I try to speak to the decision makers behind the scene too. I always ask permission for that, but a lot of times I get told no.
Okay, very good. All right, now our next question. How do any of your recommendations change in a CSQL world? So working with the sales team to hand over the lead.
That's a good question. So the CSQL world it behaves a bit differently, and I appreciate your calling that out. It was on some of the early slides. There's actually a whole different playbook we have for that. But if I'm understanding correctly, basically that's like a referral model that you're probably working with where, you have to get your customer to provide net new leads. So it's the same sorts of persuasive principles, but the deal stages are different, right? Because you're not working somebody through a direct value story with direct ROI to the customer, but you're sort of persuading them to introduce you to, other folks in their network, which is a very valuable motion, but you have to ask, what's the customer incentive? I haven't yet found a way to do that that's industry agnostic, beyond saying that there are carrots and sticks that customers get for, well, that you can put in place that motivate customers toward that CSQL. Um, it varies depending on industry. Sometimes people are too competitive to want to do that motion. Sometimes people are not incentivized by whatever you're offering, the certain carrots that you're offering. Um, and so my main advice is just drop me a note. And we'll talk about the incentives that you're dealing with in your industry, and we could probably work through it.
Okay, very good. How do you typically handle the not right now or we don't have capacity for this project right now objections?
Yeah, good question. So I try to frame it to the customer's benefit, and I say, just so I don't bother you, just so I don't bother you, is this a 6 month thing or is this a never thing? That's really important distinction, right? And and I often still say this to people, like, what are the criteria that need to be in place? Just so we can come back to this mindfully. What are the criteria that need to be in place for you to say this is good timing? And this happened for me within the last week. One said, I just don't know if this is ever going to be a fit. I don't know if we really need this. I don't know if we even need basic customer success playbooks. I was like, okay, well, you might not be the person worth talking to. Whereas somebody else said, look, honestly, I need 2 weeks to get through this fundraise. I'm like, totally fine. I'm going to put something on the calendar 2 weeks out.
All right, how do you handle ghosting from an upsell prospect who was interested, had several demos, has had pricing proposal, and now has gone
Mm.
dark?
Yeah, yeah. So that's probably where, well, there's two things. The broad answer is there's a non-responsive customer playbook that I use, that I can share and we could modify for your use case. But in that specific case, that's probably where I use that takeaway that I was saying. And I know this feels so daring to say, maybe this isn't the right fit for you, right? To say, I like to be apologetic about it. Like, look, I'm sorry. Here was my read on the room. Maybe I'm wrong. I had the impression that you said X, Y, and Z, and that means that we're going to move forward, but it seems like there's a hold up. Maybe timing's not right. Maybe this isn't the right solution for you. Don't waste your time if they're, not being authentic with you and not giving you a direct answer. But usually that'll be enough to get at least some response, hopefully.
I'm taking your 4 minutes that you have left. How should a CSM best partner with a sales executive on upsells and cross sells?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good question. So it depends on the motion. So in some motions, the RACI chart, the accountability chart, by the way, if you don't have an accountability chart or a RACI chart, I've got some templates I could share, and certainly can help with that process so you don't step on each other's toes. The accountability chart might look like this, where CS is responsible for demo setting and then sales is responsible for closing the deal. That's a little bit different than sort of like the sort of co-pilot model where, the two teams are working together, which is different than the model where like CS takes low complexity or low revenue deals, sales takes high complexity, high revenue deals. But regardless, if I just assume it's that use case where it's like CS is demo setting, then I think it's really important to be hyper focused on the expansion triggers that your customers have. And you want to monitor, okay, here's my addressable market of customers. Here's my book of business. I want to make sure that I have a dashboard of all the expansion triggers for every one of my customers that can signal opportunities for different products. And if you're working with that AE and you're delivering to them like a list of qualified leads based on information that you've found, you're going to have a great relationship. I mean, I've seen that work really well.
Excellent. I'm like dangerous territory if we can do one more, maybe. Let's see if we can sneak this one in. Okay. How do you handle a customer who bought the product but then never went through onboarding and hasn't responded since?
Yeah, so like I said, I've got this non-responsive customer playbook that I've been working on for years. It's a 90-day sequence that goes through different strategies from starting to like revisit their value propositions and why they purchased initially, appealing to their reason. I mean, working the way all the way to the question, have you given up? Right? A lot of times that for some reason is the one that helps customers just say, no. Okay, oh, you haven't given up. Okay, I'm just gonna keep bothering you then. And I think also disclaiming to the customer, like, hey, look, like the really key thing is if you're getting ghosted, the customer may not see you on the same level as them. They might see you as this petulant vendor who's always bothering them. But the key thing is to recognize like your time is really valuable. And the same way they wouldn't no-show their meetings with their doctor, they shouldn't no-show meetings to you, right? But drop me a note if you're looking for that playbook. I'm happy to help.
Excellent. Well, Rob, that is time for us today. So thank you all so much for those of you who stayed till the very, very end. Obviously, Rob brought value to our very last minute. So thank you so much. Again, we recognize that your time is super valuable, and we're so grateful that you would give that to us here at Client Success. So hopefully you found today's session valuable. I know I did. And I've been doing this for a long time, and I was over here taking notes as fast as I could. So hopefully you guys will come back for part 2 of this. Remember, this is a series. So good news for you is if you registered for this one, which obviously you did because you're here, you do not need to re-register. The invite should be appearing on your calendar for next Tuesday. But because this was so fantastic, I would be grateful. Rob would be grateful. Can you tell your friends? Can you go out there and help us promote this and get more people? Because honestly, as we all up-level our skills, especially around this motion, it makes us more valuable to our organizations, which makes us more valuable as a community and as a discipline and a practice. So please, let's spread the word. Let's help up-level all of us and get us the skills that we need to be successful. So thank you guys so much for your time. Rob, thank you so much for joining us from sunny Hawaii. I hope the rest of your trip is a fantastic one, and hopefully you'll be back home for next week.
I will be.
Great,
Yep.
because my jealousy is off the charts. I need you to be in an area here on the East Coast where it's safe and maybe cloudy. All right, guys. Well, thank you all so much. We will see you next Tuesday, same time, same place. Don't forget, for those of you in the States, next Monday is Memorial Day. So don't forget to come back on Tuesday because you won't have Monday to remind yourselves. So come back. We'll see you next week. Thank you guys again.